Welcome to the course introduction video for East Asia 239, Taoism and Chinese Civilization. In this lecture, I'll be telling you first, what is Taoism and why should we study it? And then secondly, what is the structure of this course as an online asynchronous class? Taoism, which is also often spelled with a T, but pronounced Taoism in older English translations, is generally not well understood in the West. Taoism is slightly better understood in contemporary China. Most Chinese people know at least a little bit about Taoism, but it isn't commonly part of most people's experiences, especially in urban centers. Taoism, especially in the West, is often considered identical to the contents of a single book, the Tao Te Ching, written supposedly by Lao Tzu over 2,000 years ago. Notice the different spellings of the book and of the author. Also, sometimes the book is just called by the author's name, and it's referred to as the Lao Tzu. That's common in many early Chinese philosophical texts. Beyond that, at least in the West, perhaps the only thing that many people associate with Taoism is what in English is sometimes called the yin-yang symbol. And there you see it, with its actual official name. The real name of this thing is not the yin-yang symbol. It's called the Taiji Tu, or the diagram of the supreme ultimate. Now, here's what the Taiji Tu originally looked like. The original version of the Taiji Tu was supposedly received from a Taoist priest by a fellow named Zhou Dunyi in the 11th century. Now, Zhou Dunyi, who did play the biggest role in popularizing this image, belonged to a philosophical movement called Daoxue, or study of the way, but this movement is now not thought of as Taoism at all. This is really what in English is commonly called Neo-Confucianism, and that's reasonable because it really was much more closely connected to the Confucian classics than to anything from Taoism. And there on the right side, you'll see the original form of the Taiji Tu as it was first published by Zhou Dunyi. Notice that it's much more complex, much more is going on, and there's a lot less emphasis on the combination of yin and yang. Now, the Taiji Tu slowly evolved into the simplified modern form that we all recognize, but it really wasn't readopted back from Confucianism into Taoism until the 18th century, and it wasn't considered a general symbol of Taoism until the 20th century. And then again, the basic balance between yin and yang that the simplified Taiji Tu represents really was not a major principle of the early Taoist texts. And this goes to show you that we should be careful when we approach Taoism, because a lot that we might assume is common knowledge about this philosophy or this religion is in fact not really true at all. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there. So hopefully in this course, I'll be able to give you some facts about what Taoism actually was and how it evolved over the centuries. Now, one problem we have is that in fact, the word Taoism in English refers to two very different sets of phenomena in Chinese. So Taoism in English could refer to the Chinese words 道家思想 which is really very clearly a philosophical tradition, beginning with the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi in the first millennium BC, but then evolving and being adopted by later philosophers, thinkers, artists, writers, and so on. And then, secondly, Taoism also covers something called Daojiao, which is much more clearly a group of religious traditions, which were influenced by the early Taoist texts, but then which developed pantheons of gods, religious rituals, in some cases a church hierarchy, and all the other normal trappings of religion. Now, this course will cover Taoism both as a philosophy and as a religion, over many variations and many ways that it influenced the course of Chinese civilization. So, there's a huge amount of variation in what Taoism could mean. This really isn't a single religion in quite the same way that we might think of something like Christianity being a single religion, even though Christianity certainly does have a very, very complex history. There's huge variations in theology between different denominations. But even with that level of complexity, we still normally would talk about Christianity as a religion. Taoism doesn't quite fit that model. It's better to think of Taoism as a collection of related but distinct intellectual and religious movements, which all shared an interest in certain early texts, especially the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi. Now, because of this variation, it's really impossible to just summarize one or two basic ideas that are common across all versions of Taoism. But it is usually the case that in most of its different forms, Taoism offered a critique of mainstream or orthodox Chinese culture. So, thinkers influenced by Taoist philosophy tended to espouse antisocial values. They were often attuned to nature rather than to society. And they had a tendency to refuse career paths that would lead to wealth and high social status. On the other hand, believers in Taoist religions were very different. They were often much lower class, members of the general peasantry, who did not have access to wealth and power, but instead they, through religion, were seeking for other routes towards success, health, or transcendence of the world. Therefore, studying Taoism can remind us of many ways in which Chinese civilization has not been monolithic, but instead it's contained many complex and competing ideas about how the world works and what makes for a happy life. In order to understand Chinese history, it's really important to not think of Chinese culture as just having a simple essence that can be summarized, or say, all Chinese people are all alike, and in all of Chinese history, there's always been one motivating idea. Obviously, that's way too simplistic. Instead, just as any civilization would, Chinese civilization has been constituted by a series of contrasting motivations and interlocking debates. And if we think of the three main religions of China as having been Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, among these three, Taoism probably presents the clearest view of what a challenge to mainstream society looks like in the Chinese context. Of course, in the 20th century, Taoism has also been highly influential beyond China, especially the Tao Te Ching, which has been translated literally hundreds of times. And it has taken on a kind of countercultural status in the West as well. Ideas from Taoism, I think, are inherently interesting, regardless of what they say about Chinese culture. Of course, the point of this class is not to convert anyone to Taoism, but you might find that some of these ideas might influence how you think. And even if you decide Taoist ideas are really wrong, I think that they should provide you with a good challenge to clarify what you do believe for yourself and why. Okay, having said a little bit to introduce Taoism, I'd like to turn and now address the structure of this course. Now, this course was originally online even before the pandemic because it is specifically designed to be a large online course. And so even after we came back from the pandemic, I was given an exemption to continue running this one online rather than changing it back to an in-person class. Now, keeping the class entirely online in asynchronous format has certain benefits. So I can take many more students in the class this way, obviously. And because there are no in-person meetings, it's easy for students to fit it into your schedule. And you can do each week's lessons as well as the midterm and the final whenever you have time for them. So I hope that can make your lives a bit simpler. There are, of course, also significant downsides for a class that's all online, and I'd like you to consider these seriously before you make up your mind whether you really want to take this class. Now, for one thing, this is just a low service class. It's designed to accommodate hundreds of students if necessary. Most of my own labor hours go into designing this course and keeping it updated. And when a class like this has as many and as complicated a set of e-class materials as this does, that actually takes a lot of time. And that's where I have to spend my time rather than with our in-person meetings, which might happen for most of your classes. Now we do have a TA this year, Chris Wong. Chris is great. She took this course a few years ago when she was an undergraduate student. And you can email Chris if you have questions, and you can also meet her in her online office hours. In addition, I will try to arrange a few optional in-person meetings with me over the course of the semester, just so that you have a chance to meet the prof, to ask questions you might have about Taoism or anything else you're curious about regarding classical Chinese culture. And I'd also like the chance to be able to meet you too. But those are all going to be just optional kind of enrichment meetings for anyone who's interested, and it won't be part of any graded exercise. So for the most part, this is really an impersonal class. All of your learning will have to come through doing the readings, watching my lecture videos, and then doing exercises meant to simulate hands-on, in-person learning. Now, let me talk about student backgrounds and this course. This course is designed to be equally difficult, or maybe equally easy, both for Chinese international students and for Canadians and others who might not have any prior knowledge of China, Chinese language, or Taoism. Now, in the past, there have been lots of Canadian students who have gotten good grades and poor grades in this class. There have been lots of Chinese international students who've gotten good grades and poor grades in this class. That's because I've specifically designed all of the quiz and exam questions not to be testing whether or not you have some kind of personal background, but to be testing whether you have done the reading and whether you have watched the lecture videos and paid attention to them and studied. And so if you are working hard, you're doing the homework, you're doing the assignments, you're studying, and then you take the quizzes and the exams, probably you'll get a good grade. And if you don't do those things, then probably you won't get a good grade. And that's what's going to count, not where are you from or what's your native language. Now, for those of you who are Chinese, I think it's very, very likely that much of the course content might differ from what you have heard about Taoism before. Now, that isn't because I'm a Canadian, I have some kind of weird Canadian understanding of Taoism that different than Chinese scholars do. That's not what's going on. Rather, the things that I'm going to teach you in this class are pretty much things that all scholars of Taoism agree on, whether we're Chinese or Western. The difference is that scholars know a great deal that's different than what is taught about Taoism in Chinese high schools or taught about Taoism in popular media in China. I'm not knocking Chinese high schools. I'm knocking high schools in general, whether they're in China or Canada or anywhere else. There's just a lot that high schools teach that isn't always 100% the truth, no matter what country you're in. And that's why we have, scholars working at universities that actually research things in a lot more detail. All right. So if some of this course content is surprising to you or goes against what you may have heard, I just have to ask you to trust me. This is not because it's a Canadian interpretation of Taoism. It's because you're now in university, right? And you're being exposed to a scholarly consensus about Taoism rather than a popular media consensus about it. Now, every week, you'll have to do the following. You read an assigned section of text and then watch a video lecture. Take a 10-minute, 10-question quiz about the reading and the lecture. You may refer back to the reading or the video while taking the quiz, but you may not collaborate with any other students. Collaboration is considered cheating. Then you'll watch a short video and do a so-called in-class exercise, which is not really in class, you're still online, but it's designed somehow to simulate a normal classroom lesson. All of these things are divided into weeks. There are tabs for week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. on the e-class. Of course, you don't have to do them week by week. You could do 2 or 3 lessons a week. You could go 2 or 3 weeks without doing any work. It's up to you. You can go at your own pace. Now, in addition, there is also a 50-minute, 50-question midterm covering weeks 1 to 6 and a 50-minute, 50-question final covering weeks 8 to 13. Let me stress that the final only covers the second half of the class, not the whole course. Now, you can do that midterm and final whenever you are ready for it. You don't have to wait for finals week to do the final exam. Questions on all of the quizzes, as well as the midterm and the final, are drawn at random from large question banks covering the assigned material. Those questions are all carefully designed to be of equal difficulty, but you're not going to get exactly the same questions as anyone else in the course. So there is that element of chance. Content for the quiz questions will be drawn in roughly equal proportions from the readings and from the lecture videos. Again, it is permitted to refer to the course videos and readings while taking the quizzes. I'm expecting that you will do so. It is not permitted to cooperate with other students when taking the quizzes. That is a form of cheating. Now, pay attention. Although you are permitted to refer to all those online course materials while taking the quizzes and the exams, you only get 1 minute per question. 1 minute per question isn't really enough to quickly search through all the lecture video and all of the assigned readings if you haven't studied them beforehand. It is very important to read the assignments, watch the lecture videos first, probably taking notes before starting the quizzes or the exams, because with just 1 minute per question, on average, you won't have enough time to answer those questions correctly if you haven't studied first. Now, the in-class activities, a few of them are designed to be like quizzes. They will have some multiple choice questions, just like the quizzes, that have right and wrong answers. There is no time limit for the in-class activities. Grades for any of the in-class activities that are like quizzes will be visible in the gradebook immediately after you finish. However, most of the in-class activities are different. They might require you to write a paragraph, draw a drawing, or do some other kind of response that doesn't have a clear right or wrong answer. For those types of in-class activities, which are most of them, your grades won't be visible in eClass until after all of the graded class activities close on April 21st. However, as long as your response has been correctly submitted and you've tried honestly to respond to the activity prompt, you can expect to receive full credit or close to full credit for those activities. So, the midterm and the final exams will each be 50 minutes long and consist of 50 questions. Again, the midterm covers weeks 2 to 6. The final covers weeks 8 to 13. Once again, it is permitted to refer to the course videos and readings while taking the exams. It is not permitted to cooperate with anyone else. The midterm and the final exam questions will be drawn from large question banks, just like the quizzes. It's possible that you might receive a few questions that you actually saw before on those quizzes, so it is worthwhile studying your previous answers, but most of the exam questions you receive will be new to you. Now, this is really important. I can't stress this enough. Unfortunately, technical problems are going to be your responsibility if you continue in this course. With an all-online asynchronous course, I just can't let people take quizzes and exams multiple times just by taking it on faith that people are being honest when they tell me that their computer or internet failed. Therefore, before beginning a quiz, weekly activity, or exam, it is your responsibility to make sure that your computer and internet are working properly, are stable, and are not going to die on you. If something happens to your computer or your internet that forces you to be logged out or to drop the quiz or the exam or the activity, and you get a 0, that's a 0. Now, in order to cover the likelihood that some of you really will encounter technical problems that aren't your fault sometimes. I know that that really does happen. I am only going to count the top 10 grades of your weekly quizzes and your top 10 activity grades toward your overall course grade. That way, let's say you have technical problems 2 weeks. On those 2 weeks, you get bounced out of the system, you get zeros. Still, your grades won't suffer at all. Because I'm automatically building that accommodation in for everyone, I'm not going to consider any additional requests to reset a weekly quiz or an activity grade. Now, for the midterm or final, of course, you take each of those only once. There's nothing to drop. I will give you leeway if the fault is that of the university only. That is, if you encounter a technical problem that causes you to be unable to complete the exam, I'm going to go and talk with IST. IST is they're the computer people for the university. They have complete records of when you tried to connect your computer to eClass. IST will be able to tell me, was the problem caused by eClass? Was the problem caused by a university internet issue or a university computer? If they say, yes, this was the university's fault, then I will reset the midterm and final for you in that case only. If IST says, no, university had no problem, the university network was up, eClass was up, it was that person's computer that failed, then sorry, you would get a 0 on the midterm or on the final if you got bounced out of the system. Now, I realize there's a lot about these policies that won't be right for every student. There's some risk involved. If you think that this all online format isn't for you, you don't like the fact that you'll never be able to see me, it's hard to talk to me, or if you think it's not fair for you to get slightly different questions from other students, or if you don't think you have faith in your own computer or internet connection, or you just don't want to take that chance when taking quizzes or exams, if you think, gosh, if my computer or internet failed and I got a 0, that would be so unfair. I'm not willing to risk that. That is totally understandable. I completely understand. I accept that. This is not for everyone. But if that's the case, please drop the class now. Please drop the class now if you can't accept these rules. If you do decide to continue in this class past the add drop deadline, it means that you accept all of these course policies that I've outlined. Now, with a class like this, which has a lot of moving pieces and it's all online and some of it is pretty complicated, confusing sometimes, I'm sure you're going to have questions. When you do have questions, I'd like for you to, the first thing you should do is really to go to the front page of eClass, find the Q&A link. There's a discussion board near the bottom of the front page of our eClass site, and just click through that. And first thing, just look and see if anyone else has asked your question already, because oftentimes students have the exact same questions. So check there first, and then if there is no answer to your question that has been posted there, please post your question yourself. It's much better to ask questions about the course in a public forum so that everyone can see the answer in case they're curious about the same thing. And so please post it there first, and then Chris will answer you as quickly as she's able to. In most cases, that wouldn't be more than a couple days after you ask the question. If there is something going on in your personal life, so for instance, you have a question about, something that you'd like to keep private and affects your participation in the class, then in that case, of course, don't post it publicly, but you may email Chris directly at her email, shuhantu. Don't email me directly, but if there's something that you ask Chris that she doesn't know how to handle, then she will bring it to my attention, and if necessary, I might get in touch with you directly from there. Okay, what are the next steps? Well, first, go ahead, take the first weekly quiz using the link just below the link for this video on the Introduction tab on eClass. Then, take the syllabus quiz below that. You should review the syllabus first. Once you've reviewed it, take the syllabus quiz. That's in place of a first in-class activity. Now, both of these two, the first quiz and the first in-class activity under this same tab, both of those must be completed before the add drop deadline. These are the only two things in the whole course that have a due date before April. After that, all other week's materials and quizzes can be done at your own pace until the date given during finals week on the final exam tab, and which has also been noted on the syllabus.